The wind off the Bitterroot Mountains cut like broken glass. Ryan Calloway stood outside the lawyer's office in Missoula, Montana, watching his breath fog the December air while his dog Gunner pressed against his leg, solid and warm in a world that had gone cold years ago. Inside that building waited the reading of his grandfather's will. Outside waited everything Ryan had left: a 1998 Ford Ranger with 240,000 miles, 2 duffel bags, and a shepherd mix who'd saved his life more times than he could count. He hadn't seen his family in 3 years. Not since the divorce. Not since the nightmares got bad enough that sleeping in his truck felt safer than closing his eyes in a house that echoed with silence. His sister Vanessa would be inside, perfectly dressed, perfectly composed, perfectly ready to remind him how far he'd fallen. His brother Eric, too, probably checking his watch already, annoyed that Grandpa's death had interrupted his real estate deals in Bozeman. Ryan pulled open the heavy oak door. The warmth hit him first, then the smell of coffee and old leather. Gunner's nails clicked across the hardwood floor as they entered. The receptionist smiled politely, the kind of smile people gave homeless veterans when they didn't know what else to do with their faces. Vanessa sat in the waiting room, legs crossed, burgundy coat unbuttoned just enough to show the silk blouse underneath. She glanced up from her phone, saw Ryan, and her expression flickered with something between pity and disgust before settling on indifference. "Ryan," she said. Not a greeting, just an acknowledgement. "Vanessa." Eric stood near the window, talking into his Bluetooth headset about commission percentages and closing dates. He raised one finger at Ryan, a gesture that meant, "Wait, I'm busy. You're not important right now." Gunner growled softly, a rumble Ryan felt more than heard. "Easy," Ryan whispered, touching the dog's head. The conference room door opened. Mitchell Greer, his grandfather's attorney for 40 years, stood framed in the doorway. White hair, wire-rimmed glasses, a face carved by time and integrity. "Please, come in," he said quietly. They filed into the room. Vanessa took the chair closest to Mitchell's desk. Eric ended his call and sat beside her, already impatient. Ryan took the chair farthest from them, Gunner settling at his feet with military precision, ears rotating toward every sound. Mitchell opened a leather folder and removed several documents. "I want to thank you all for coming. Samuel Calloway was a good man, a difficult man sometimes, but a good one. He left very specific instructions." Vanessa leaned forward slightly. Eric checked his Rolex. Mitchell began reading. The first section covered funeral arrangements, already completed. Then came small bequests to the church, the VFW Post, a scholarship fund for local students. Ryan's throat tightened. His grandfather had never talked much about money, but apparently there'd been enough to matter. "To my granddaughter, Vanessa Calloway," Mitchell read. "I leave my home in Missoula and the contents therein, valued at approximately $340,000. Vanessa's face remained neutral, but her shoulders relaxed. She'd been expecting this. "To my grandson, Eric Calloway, I leave my investment portfolio, stocks and bonds currently valued at approximately $280,000. Eric nodded, satisfied. He pulled out his phone again, probably already calculating what that meant for his next property deal. Mitchell paused. The silence stretched long enough that Ryan felt something shift in the room, like air pressure changing before a storm. "And to my grandson, Ryan Calloway," Mitchell continued, his voice softer now. "I leave the sum of $100 and the deed to the old cabin on Trapper's Ridge." The words hung in the air like smoke. Then Eric laughed, a sharp, barking sound that echoed off the paneled walls. $100 and that frozen shack? Jesus, Ryan. Grandpa really knew how to twist the knife. Vanessa didn't laugh, but her mouth curved slightly. "That cabin hasn't been habitable in 20 years. The roof's probably caved in by now." Ryan felt heat crawling up his neck. Not anger. Not yet. Just that familiar numbness that came when the world confirmed what he already suspected, that he wasn't worth much to anyone. Gunner pressed harder against his leg, sensing the shift in Ryan's breathing. "There's more," Mitchell said firmly, cutting through the mockery. He reached into the folder again and pulled out a sealed envelope, aged yellow at the edges. This was to be given to Ryan, and Ryan alone. Eric leaned back in his chair. "What?" "Grandpa's secret stash of old magazines." Mitchell ignored him. He slid the envelope across the desk. Ryan's name was written on it in his grandfather's careful script, The handwriting of a man who'd learned to write before computers existed, before the world got so fast. Ryan took it with shaking hands. The paper felt heavier than it should. "What is it?" Vanessa asked. Mitchell closed the folder. "That's between Ryan and his grandfather." Eric stood abruptly. "This is ridiculous. We drove all the way here for this. For Ryan to get some sentimental garbage while we actually inherit real assets." "Yes," Mitchell said simply. "That was Samuel's wish." Vanessa rose, gathering her coat. "Well, congratulations, Ryan. I hope the cabin keeps you warm." The words dripped with false sympathy. They left without another word, heels and dress shoes clicking across the hardwood. The door closed behind them with a soft, final thud. Ryan sat alone in the conference room with Mitchell and Gunnar. The envelope in his hands suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. "Your grandfather," Mitchell said quietly, "was one of the most deliberate men I ever knew. He didn't do anything without reason." Ryan looked up. "Then why leave me something worthless?" Mitchell's eyes, magnified slightly behind his glasses, held something Ryan couldn't quite read. "Did he?" Before Ryan could answer, Mitchell stood and extended his hand. Ryan shook it, feeling the strength still in those old fingers. "Go to the cabin, Ryan," Mitchell said. "Your grandfather insisted. He said you'd understand when the time was right." Ryan walked out into the December cold. Gunnar trotted beside him, alert and focused despite the freezing wind. Inside the truck, Ryan sat with the engine running, heat blowing weakly through vents that hadn't worked properly in years. He turned the envelope over in his hands, studying the seal, the handwriting, the weight of whatever his grandfather had wanted him to know. He opened it carefully. Inside was a single piece of paper, folded once. The handwriting was shakier than on the envelope, written more recently, probably near the end. "Ryan, if you're reading this, then I'm gone and you're sitting in Mitchell's office wondering why the old man left you nothing but a frozen cabin and pocket change. Your brother and sister are probably laughing. Let them. The cabin on Trapper's Ridge isn't what they think it is. It never was. I built that place in 1968 with my own hands. Every log, every nail, every stone in the foundation. I built it to hide something. Something I've protected for 50 years. Something that belongs to you now. The war taught me that the most valuable things are the ones nobody sees coming. That the men who survive aren't always the strongest or the smartest. They're the ones who pay attention. The ones who trust their instincts. The ones who know when to be patient. You have those qualities, Ryan. You always did. Even when you were a boy, you saw things others missed. That's why I chose you. That's why the cabin is yours. Go there. Go in winter, when the snow covers everything and the ridge is quiet. Take Gunnar with you. That dog has better instincts than most men I knew in the service. He'll know. There's a loose stone in the fireplace, third from the bottom on the left side. Behind it, you'll find the first key. Everything else follows from there. Trust yourself, son. Trust your dog. And remember that some fortunes aren't measured in dollars. Some are measured in whether you become the kind of man who deserves them. I loved you more than I ever said. I hope you can forgive an old soldier for that. Grandpa." Ryan read it 3 times. His hands shook slightly, not from cold, but from something else, something like hope trying to break through decades of disappointment and defeat. Gunnar whined softly, placing one paw on Ryan's knee. "Yeah," Ryan whispered. "I know." He folded the letter carefully and tucked it into his jacket pocket, feeling it settle against his chest like a promise or a question he didn't yet know how to answer. The Bitterroot Mountains rose white and jagged in his rearview mirror as Ryan drove north toward Trapper's Ridge. Snow began falling an hour outside Missoula, thick flakes that turned the highway into a tunnel of white. Gunnar sat in the passenger seat, head lifted, watching the landscape change from valley to foothills to mountains that scraped the belly of the sky. Ryan's grandfather had rarely spoken about the cabin. A few mentions over the years, always vague, always dismissive. Just an old hunting shack, he'd say. Nothing special. But Ryan remembered one time, maybe when he was 12, sitting on the porch while Grandpa carved a piece of cedar. The old man had looked up at the mountains and said something strange. "Some places hold more than wood and stone, Ryan. Some places hold time." Ryan hadn't understood then. He wasn't sure he understood now. The turnoff to Trapper's Ridge was barely visible, a Forest Service road that hadn't been maintained in years. Ryan's truck groaned as it climbed, tires fighting for traction on ice-slicked gravel. Pine trees pressed close on both sides, branches heavy with snow, creating a corridor that grew narrower with every mile. Gunner's posture changed. His ears pricked forward, body tensing. Not afraid, focused. The same way he'd acted on patrol in Helmand Province when something waited just beyond the next compound wall. "What do you smell, boy?" Ryan murmured. The road ended abruptly at a clearing. And there, half buried in snow, stood the cabin. Ryan's breath caught. It wasn't what he expected. The structure looked small from a distance, maybe 20 feet by 20 feet, built from massive logs dark with age and weather. The roof sagged in places but held. One window was boarded over, the other clouded with decades of dirt. A stone chimney rose from the center, smoke-stained and solid. But it was the location that struck him. The cabin sat on the edge of a cliff, the Bitterroot Valley spreading out below like a painting done in white and gray and distant green. Behind it, the ridge rose another 1,000 feet, all rock and snow and silence. This wasn't just a hunting cabin. This was a fortress, a place built to see everything coming from miles away. A place built by someone who needed to watch, to wait, to keep something hidden. Ryan killed the engine. The silence that followed was so complete it hurt his ears. Gunner jumped out first, landing in snow up to his chest. He waded through it toward the cabin, then stopped suddenly, head swiveling back toward Ryan with sharp intensity. Ryan grabbed his pack and followed, boots crunching through the frozen crust. The cold bit through his jacket immediately, wind off the mountains carrying the smell of pine and ice and something older, something like stone that had never seen sunlight. The cabin door was locked with a padlock thick with rust. Ryan pulled the keys Mitchell had given him from his pocket. The third key fit. The lock resisted, frozen solid, then gave with a crack that echoed across the ridge. The door swung inward on hinges that screamed. Darkness waited inside. Ryan pulled out his flashlight, the beam cutting through dust motes that hung suspended like snow that forgot to fall. Gunner pushed past him, nose to the ground, circling the interior with the systematic precision of a dog trained to find explosives, insurgents, anything that didn't belong. The cabin's interior was a single room. A wood stove hunched in one corner, black iron crusted with rust. A table stood near the window, one chair tipped over beside it. Shelves lined the far wall, empty except for a few mason jars filled with nails and screws. The floor was rough-cut pine, gaps showing between the boards. But the fireplace dominated the back wall, built from river stones fitted together so tightly no mortar showed between them. It rose from floor to ceiling, massive and permanent, the kind of structure that would outlive the cabin itself. Ryan approached it slowly. Gunner followed, tail stiff, a low rumble building in his chest. "Third from the bottom," Ryan whispered, "left side." He knelt in front of the fireplace, running his gloved hand over the stones. Most were frozen solid, locked in place by decades and weather. But when he touched the third stone from the bottom on the left, it shifted slightly. His pulse quickened. He worked his fingers around the edges, prying gently. The stone resisted, then suddenly gave, pulling free with a scrape of rock on rock. Behind it was a hollow space, and inside that space, wrapped in oilcloth, was something metal. Ryan's hands shook as he unwrapped it. A key. Not modern, not a house key or a padlock key. This was old iron, 6 inches long, with a complex head and a shaft that ended in teeth like a wolf's jaw. The kind of key that opened something built to last. Gunner barked once, sharp and urgent. Ryan looked up. The dog stood at the far corner of the room, pawing at the floorboards with increasing intensity. His nose pressed against a gap between 2 planks, and his whole body vibrated with focus. "What VE you got?" Ryan crossed to him, kneeling beside the spot where Gunner's attention fixed. At first, he saw nothing unusual, just old wood, gaps, dust. Then his flashlight beam caught something, a faint discoloration in the grain, a pattern too regular to be natural. He pressed down on one of the boards. It flexed slightly, more than it should. He pressed harder. A soft click echoed from somewhere beneath the floor. Gunner jumped back, tail rigid, watching. Ryan stood, heart pounding, and examined the floor more carefully. Now that he knew what to look for, he could see it, a rectangle, roughly 4 feet by 3 feet, cut so precisely into the floorboards that the seams were nearly invisible. A trapdoor. He felt along the edges until his fingers found a recessed pull ring. He grabbed it, braced himself, and lifted. The door rose on counterweights, smooth and silent despite its age. Someone had maintained this. Someone had oiled these hinges, kept the mechanism working, made sure it would open when needed. Below the trapdoor, a ladder descended into darkness. Cold air rushed up from below, carrying a smell that made Ryan's stomach tighten. Not rot, not death, but something metallic and old, like a bank vault that hadn't been opened in decades. Gunnar whined, pressing against Ryan's leg. "I know," Ryan whispered. "Me too." He remembered this feeling. The compound in San Jin, the night his unit stacked outside a door while intel said Taliban fighters waited inside. The way his chest tightened, the way his hands went cold, the way every nerve in his body screamed to turn around and walk away. And the way he'd gone through that door anyway, because that's what you did. You kept moving forward even when everything inside you wanted to run. Ryan clicked on his headlamp and started down the ladder. The rungs were wood, solid, recently replaced. Someone had been down here. Recently. Gunnar hesitated at the top, whining louder now. "Stay," Ryan called up. "I'll be right back." But Gunnar didn't stay. Of course he didn't. The dog had never left Ryan's side in combat, and he wasn't starting now. He descended the ladder carefully, one paw at a time, body pressed close to the rungs. At the bottom, Ryan's boots hit concrete. He swept his light around, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. A tunnel, 8 feet high, reinforced with timber beams and concrete. It stretched back into the mountain, disappearing beyond the reach of his flashlight. Along the walls, old electrical conduit ran in neat parallel lines. Ventilation shafts. Junction boxes. This wasn't a root cellar. This wasn't a storm shelter. This was military construction. Professional. Deliberate. Hidden. Ryan's breathing quickened. His grandfather had built this. Somehow, impossibly, the old man had carved a tunnel into the mountain and kept it secret for 50 years. Gunnar moved ahead, nose working the ground, body tense but not panicked. He trusted this space more than Ryan did, or at least trusted his nose enough to investigate. They walked deeper. The tunnel stretched 50 feet, then opened into a chamber. Ryan stopped, his light playing across something that made his mind refuse to process what he was seeing. Storage. Military-grade storage. Metal shelves bolted to rock walls. Wooden crates stacked in precise rows. Ammunition boxes. Footlockers with stenciled numbers. And in the center of the room, standing like a monument, a massive steel door with a wheel lock in the center and German words stamped across the top. Reichsbank. Berlin. 1945. Ryan's legs went weak. He grabbed the nearest shelf to steady himself. Gunnar sat beside him, leaning his weight against Ryan's thigh, grounding him the way he always did when the flashbacks came, when the past tried to swallow the present whole. "Easy," Ryan whispered. Not to the dog, to himself. He moved closer to the steel door, running his hand over the cold metal. The wheel lock was massive, designed to secure something worth protecting. And stamped beside the handle was a keyhole that matched the shape of the iron key in Ryan's pocket. He pulled it out slowly. His hands shook as he fitted the key into the lock. It turned with surprising ease, as if someone had kept the mechanism oiled, kept everything ready for this exact moment. The wheel lock spun. Bolts inside the door retracted with heavy, final sounds. Then the door swung open on its own, counterbalanced and smooth, revealing what his grandfather had hidden in this mountain for half a century. Ryan's flashlight beam fell across stacks of wooden crates, each one marked with numbers and symbols he didn't recognize. But he didn't need to recognize them to understand what he was looking at. Gold. Rows and rows of gold bars, each one stamped with an eagle and swastika, each one stolen during a war that ended before Ryan was born. His grandfather's voice echoed in his memory. "The war taught me that the most valuable things are the ones nobody sees coming." Ryan stood in the threshold of the vault, trying to breathe, trying to think, trying to understand how a man who'd lived modestly his entire life had hidden a fortune that could change everything. Gunnar whined softly. Ryan reached down, touching the dog's head. "Yeah, buddy. I know. Because this wasn't just gold. This was a secret that could destroy them. And tomorrow, ready or not, Ryan would have to decide what kind of man he wanted to be. The kind who kept it hidden, or the kind who brought it into the light. Ryan stood frozen in the vault's entrance, his headlamp casting long shadows across the stacked crates. The gold bars gleamed dully in the artificial light, each one bearing the eagle and swastika of the Third Reich. His mind raced, trying to calculate what he was looking at. 20 crates, maybe 25. If each held even a fraction of what the markings suggested. He forced himself to breathe. In for 4 counts, hold for 4, out for 4. The technique the VA therapist had taught him for when the walls started closing in. Gunnar pressed harder against his leg, sensing the spike in Ryan's heart rate. "I'm okay," Ryan whispered. The lie tasted bitter. He stepped fully into the vault. The temperature was noticeably colder here, the air dry and still, preserved like everything else in this underground tomb. Along the back wall, separate from the gold, stood a row of metal filing cabinets, military surplus from decades past. On top of one sat a footlocker with his grandfather's name stenciled across the top. SGTS, Calloway, U.S. Army. Ryan approached it slowly, as if sudden movement might make everything disappear. The footlocker wasn't locked. He lifted the lid, hinges creaking softly. Inside lay layers of his grandfather's past. Photographs, dozens of them, showing young soldiers in winter gear standing beside tanks in snow-covered forests. His grandfather's face, so young it hurt to recognize, stared out from one photo, his arm around another soldier, both of them grinning despite the cold that must have been cutting through their uniforms. Beneath the photos, bundled in leather straps, were documents. Ryan pulled out the first bundle, untying the straps with cold-numbed fingers. The top document was typed on yellowed paper, an official U.S. Army field report dated March 1945. He read slowly, his flashlight beam tracking across faded typewriter text. Confidential After-Action Report. Operation Jackpot 3rd Armored Division, 36th Armored Infantry Regiment, March 28, 1945. At 0430 hours, reconnaissance patrol, led by SGT Samuel Calloway, discovered abandoned Reichsbank depot 3 kilometers southeast of Merkers, Germany. Initial survey revealed extensive underground vault system containing assets estimated at. Ryan's hands trembled. He read further, the words blurring together. Treasury reserves. Cultural artifacts. Gold bullion estimated at 200 metric tons. Emergency evacuation by retreating German forces incomplete. Assets secured by 3rd Armored Division pending transfer to Allied Command. But there was more. Beneath the official report lay another document. This one handwritten in his grandfather's careful script. A journal entry. April 2nd, 1945. They're moving it all out tomorrow. Trucks lined up for miles. Officers counting bars like they're afraid someone might pocket one. Maybe they should be. I've never seen men look at gold the way these officers do. Like it's water and they're dying of thirst. Collins caught 3 privates trying to bury a crate in the woods. Shot one of them. The other 2 are in the stockade waiting for court-martial. The brass says it's about honor, about not becoming thieves. But I heard the colonel talking last night. He said half this gold will disappear into Swiss accounts before it ever sees the U.S. Treasury. The men taking it won't be privates. They'll be the ones giving the orders. I keep thinking about my mother. About the way she worked 3 jobs after Dad died. About how she never had enough, never complained, just kept working until her hands were so rough they'd crack and bleed in winter. And now I'm standing guard over enough gold to give her everything she never had. Enough to make sure she never works another day. I keep thinking about that. Can't stop thinking about it. Ryan's throat tightened. He flipped to the next entry. April 8th, 1945. Did something I can't undo. Not sure I want to undo it. Last transport left yesterday. Official count showed all assets accounted for. But they didn't count the crate we buried in the forest. Collins, Morrison, Dietrich, and me. For men who decided we'd had enough of watching rich men get richer while our families scraped by. We took 1 crate. Just 1. Out of hundreds. Told ourselves it wouldn't be missed. Told ourselves we'd earned it. Told ourselves a lot of things that probably aren't true. We buried it deep. Made a map. Swore we'd come back after the war, split it 4 ways, and disappear. For men who'd finally get to live instead of just survive. But war has a way of changing plans. Ryan turned the page, but his hands were shaking so badly, he almost dropped the journal. Gunnar whined, pushing his nose against Ryan's knee. April 15th, 1945. Collins is dead. Took shrapnel yesterday during a counterattack we didn't see coming. Died screaming for his mother while I held his hand. He was 23 years old. Never got to spend a single dollar of the gold we buried. Morrison went next. Sniper, 2 days later. One shot, center mass, dead before he hit the ground. Dietrich made it home. I got a letter from his sister last month. He hanged himself in his garage 3 weeks after returning stateside. Shell shock, she said. Couldn't adjust. Couldn't sleep. Couldn't live with what he'd seen. So now it's just me. Just me and a map to gold that cost 3 lives before anyone even touched it. Blood money. That's what it is. But it's also my mother's future. My family's future. The difference between her dying in a factory and dying in peace. I'm bringing it home. God forgive me, I'm bringing it home. Ryan carefully set the journal aside and reached deeper into the footlocker. His fingers touched metal, and he pulled out a folded map, hand-drawn on waterproof paper. It showed a section of forest near Merkers, Germany, with coordinates and landmarks. But someone, his grandfather probably, had drawn a red line from Germany across the Atlantic to Montana, ending at a small X labeled Trapper's Ridge. Beneath the map lay more documents. Shipping manifests, falsified to show timber supplies. Transfer orders, forged signatures authorizing transport of construction materials. His grandfather had smuggled the gold home piece by piece, disguised as legitimate cargo, using the chaos of post-war demobilization to move a fortune under everyone's noses. The final document in the footlocker was a letter addressed to Ryan. The paper was fresh, the ink recent. His grandfather had written this near the end. Ryan, if you're reading this, you found what I've hidden. You're probably standing in that vault right now, looking at enough gold to change your life forever, wondering what kind of man your grandfather really was. Wondering if I was a thief, a traitor, a monster. Maybe I was all three. Maybe I was just a scared kid who thought he could outrun what he'd done. I've had 60 years to think about it, and I still don't have a good answer. Here's what I know. I took something that wasn't mine. I told myself I was taking it from thieves who'd stolen it first, from Nazis who'd ripped it from Jewish families and occupied countries. I told myself one crate wouldn't be missed. I told myself a lot of things. But I also know this. That gold kept my mother alive. It bought her a house after years of renting rooms in other people's homes. It paid for medicine when she got sick. It gave her 5 years of peace before she died. 5 years where she could sit on her porch and watch sunsets instead of working herself into an early grave. Was it worth it? I don't know. I've never known. What I do know is that you're the only person I trust with this decision. Your sister cares about appearances. Your brother cares about profit. But you, Ryan, you care about doing the right thing, even when it costs you everything. Especially then. This gold is yours now. You can turn it over to the government and let them decide what to do with it. You can sell it quietly and build the life you deserve. You can walk away and pretend you never found it. All of those choices are yours to make. But here's what I'm asking. Whatever you decide, make sure it helps people who need help. Make sure it does more good than harm. Make sure that if I'm judged for stealing it, at least I can say it ended up in the right hands. You're a better man than I ever was, Ryan. You always have been. That's why the cabin is yours. That's why this burden is yours. Because I know you'll carry it better than I did. I'm sorry for putting this on you. I'm sorry for a lot of things. But I'm not sorry for believing in you. Grandpa. Ryan folded the letter carefully and tucked it back into the footlocker. His vision blurred, tears freezing on his cheeks in the cold vault air. Gunnar leaned against him, solid and warm and absolutely certain that whatever Ryan decided, they'd face it together. Ryan wiped his eyes and stood. He moved back to the stacked crates, running his hands over the rough wood. Each crate was marked with German numbers and symbols, official stamps from a regime that had murdered millions. This wasn't treasure. This was the remnants of genocide, wealth stolen from families who'd been destroyed, hidden by soldiers who thought they could escape history. And now it was his. He pulled out his phone, checking for signal. Nothing. Not this deep in the mountain, not this far from civilization. Whatever he decided, he'd have to climb back to the surface to make it real. Gunnar barked once, sharp and insistent. Ryan looked down at him, and the dog tilted his head toward the ladder, toward the world above, toward whatever came next. Yeah, Ryan whispered. You're right. We can't stay down here forever. He took one last look around the vault, at the gold that had cost his grandfather 60 years of guilt, at the documents that told a story of war and theft and desperate choices, at the footlocker that held a dead man's confession. Then he turned and followed Gunnar toward the ladder, climbing back toward daylight and decisions he wasn't ready to make but couldn't avoid any longer. Behind them, the vault waited in darkness, patient and terrible and worth more than Ryan could calculate. But what he could calculate, what he understood with absolute clarity as he emerged into the cabin's cold interior, was that his grandfather had been right about one thing. The most valuable things weren't always measured in gold. Sometimes they were measured in the choices you made when no one was watching. And Ryan's choice was about to change everything. Ryan spent the night in the cabin, or what passed for night, in a place where darkness felt absolute and time moved differently. He couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the gold bars stacked like cordwood, each one stamped with the machinery of genocide. Gunnar dozed fitfully beside the wood stove Ryan had managed to coax back to life, the dog's ears twitching at every sound, real or imagined. By dawn, Ryan had made a decision. Or rather, the decision had made itself. He needed help. Real help. The kind that came with credentials, authority, and the ability to verify what he'd found without immediately turning him into either a millionaire or a criminal. Maybe both. The drive back to Missoula took 3 hours through snow that had started falling again, heavy and wet. Gunnar sat in the passenger seat, alert and watchful, occasionally glancing at Ryan as if checking to make sure he was still breathing, still present, still here. Ryan parked outside a small office building on the university campus. The sign read, Dr. Sarah Vance, historical consultant, World War II archive specialist. He'd found her number online, called from a gas station payphone like some kind of fugitive, and somehow convinced her to meet him on a Saturday morning with nothing more than the promise that he had something important to show her. She was waiting in her office when he arrived, a woman in her mid-50s with steel-gray hair pulled back in a practical bun and eyes that had spent decades reading documents most people couldn't even interpret. Mr. Calloway, she said, extending her hand. You sounded urgent on the phone. I am. Ryan shook her hand, noting the strength in her grip. Thank you for seeing me. She gestured to a chair across from her desk. Gunnar settled at Ryan's feet without being asked. Dr. Vance raised an eyebrow. Service dog? Something like that. Afghanistan or Iraq? Afghanistan. Helmand Province. She nodded, a flicker of recognition and respect crossing her face. My nephew served there. He came home different. They all do. Ryan didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. Dr. Vance sat, folding her hands on the desk. You said you found something. Something related to World War II. Ryan pulled his grandfather's journal from his pack, along with the official Army report and several of the photographs. He laid them out carefully, watching her face as she began to read. Her expression didn't change at first. Professional assessment, academic distance. But halfway through the journal, her eyes widened slightly. When she reached the section about the buried crate, she looked up sharply. Mr. Calloway, are you telling me you found? I found the gold, Ryan said quietly. All of it, hidden in a vault under my grandfather's cabin. The silence that followed was so complete that Ryan could hear the clock on the wall ticking, counting seconds that felt like hours. Dr. Vance removed her glasses slowly, cleaning them with a cloth from her desk drawer. Do you understand what you're saying? Yes. Do you understand the legal implications? The historical significance? The fact that this gold, if it's authentic, was stolen from Nazi reserves that were themselves stolen from occupied territories and persecuted populations. Yes. She put her glasses back on, studying him with an intensity that made Ryan want to look away. Why did you come to me? Because I need someone who can verify what I found. Someone who can help me figure out the right thing to do with it. And because... He hesitated. Because I can't carry this alone. Something in her face softened. No, she said quietly. I imagine you can't. She spent the next hour asking questions. Where exactly was the vault? How much gold? What condition? What documentation existed? Ryan answered everything honestly, holding nothing back. Gunnar watched her the entire time, assessing whether she was trustworthy. The dog's judgment had kept Ryan alive more than once. He trusted it now. Finally, Dr. Vance leaned back in her chair. I need to see it. The vault, the gold, everything. I can't verify anything based on documents alone. When? Today? Now. This isn't something we can wait on. 2 hours later, Ryan's truck climbed back up the Forest Service road toward Trapper's Ridge, Dr. Vance in the passenger seat, and Gunnar relegated to the extended cab, where he watched the back window with suspicious intensity. Your grandfather, Dr. Vance said as they drove. was part of something much larger than he probably realized. The gold discoveries in 1945, Merkers especially, were among the most significant finds of the war. We're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars in assets. Most of it was recovered, cataloged, returned to countries of origin when possible. But there were always rumors. Stories about crates that went missing, officers who got rich, enlisted men who disappeared into the Canadian wilderness with enough gold to live like kings. You think my grandfather's story is true? I think soldiers did desperate things during that war. I think the chaos of the aftermath created opportunities for men who were willing to take them. And I think guilt is a powerful motivator. Your grandfather lived modestly his entire life, even though he apparently had access to a fortune. That suggests a man struggling with what he'd done. Ryan gripped the steering wheel tighter. Does that make it okay? No, but it makes it human. The cabin came into view, looking even more desolate in the gray afternoon light. Dr. Vance stood in the clearing, turning slowly to take in the ridge, the valley below, the isolation of the location. He chose this place carefully, she murmured. Remote enough that no one would stumble across it. Defensible enough that he could see anyone approaching. Your grandfather was thinking like a soldier even 30 years after the war ended. Inside the cabin, Ryan showed her the fireplace, the hidden stone, the trapdoor. She documented everything with a camera, taking notes in a leather journal that reminded Ryan uncomfortably of his grandfather's wartime writings. When they descended into the vault, her professional composure finally cracked. She stood in the entrance, flashlight beam playing across the stacked crates, and whispered, "My God." Ryan stood beside her, watching her face. "How much?" She moved forward, examining the markings on the nearest crate. She pulled a small crowbar from her pack. She'd come prepared, and carefully pried open the top of one crate. Gold bars gleamed in the artificial light, each one stamped with the Reichsbank eagle. "Standard 25-pound bars," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "Roughly 400 troy ounces per bar. At current gold prices." She trailed off, calculating. "Each bar is worth approximately $800,000. If each crate holds 20 bars, and you have 25 crates." She looked at Ryan. "You're looking at somewhere between $400 and $500 million. The number hit Ryan like a physical blow. He sat down hard on one of the wooden crates, his legs suddenly unable to support him. Gunner pressed against his knee, whining softly. "That can't be right," Ryan whispered. Dr. Vance opened another crate, then another. "It's right." "My God, Ryan, your grandfather transported one of the largest individual hoards of Nazi gold ever discovered. And he kept it hidden for 60 years. She sat beside him, both of them perched on stolen wealth that could buy and sell their entire lives 1,000 times over. "The question now," she said quietly, "is what you do with it." Ryan laughed, a brittle sound that echoed off the concrete walls. "That's not a question. I can't keep stolen gold." "Can't you?" Dr. Vance looked at him. "Legally, you could argue it's abandoned property. Your grandfather died, left it to you, no one knows it exists. You could sell it through private channels, a bar at a time, and live like a king for the rest of your life. While knowing where it came from." "Yes, while knowing that." She paused. "But there's another option. You could do what your grandfather asked. Use it to help people. Not by keeping it, but by returning it to its rightful owners or their descendants. Jewish restitution groups, museums, families who lost everything and never got it back." Ryan looked at the gold stacked around them. "How do you even begin to do that?" "Very carefully. With lawyers, historians, authentication experts. It would take years. It would be complicated. And it would mean you'd end up with nothing." "I already have nothing," Ryan said quietly. "No." Dr. Vance touched his shoulder gently. "You have a choice. And you have a chance to turn something stolen into something that matters. That's more than most people ever get." Gunner barked once, the sound sharp in the enclosed space. Both of them looked at the dog. He stood facing the exit, tail rigid, ears forward. The stance Ryan recognized from hundreds of patrols. "Someone's coming," Ryan said, standing quickly. They climbed the ladder fast. At the top, Ryan could hear it too, an engine, growing louder, approaching up the Forest Service road. He killed his headlamp and moved to the cabin window. A black Mercedes SUV pulled into the clearing, expensive and out of place in the mountain snow. Two men stepped out. Ryan recognized one of them immediately. Eric, his brother. and beside him, a man in an expensive suit who carried himself with the casual arrogance of someone used to getting what he wanted. "Shit," Ryan whispered. Dr. Vance stood beside him. "Who are they?" "My brother. I don't know who the other one is." But he was about to find out. Because Eric and his companion were walking toward the cabin door with the confidence of men who knew exactly what they were looking for. And Ryan had a terrible feeling he knew how they'd found out. The cabin door swung open without warning. Ryan hadn't locked it, hadn't thought he needed to. Not up here where the world felt protected by distance and snow. Eric stepped inside first, brushing snow from his shoulders with practiced irritation, followed by the man in the suit, who moved with the careful precision of someone evaluating every detail for future use. "Ryan," Eric said, his voice carrying false warmth. "Thought I might find you here." Gunnar growled, a deep rumble that vibrated through the floor. Ryan rested a hand on the dog's head, steadying both of them. "How did you know I was here?" Eric smiled. "You're not exactly subtle, little brother. Called a historian, drove up here twice in 3 days, asking around town about Grandpa's service record. People talk." He gestured to his companion. "This is Marcus Webb, attorney specializing in estate law and asset recovery." Webb extended his hand. Ryan didn't take it. After a moment, Webb lowered it, unfazed. "Mr. Calloway," Webb said smoothly, "I represent your siblings in a matter concerning your grandfather's estate. Specifically, certain assets that may not have been properly disclosed during probate." Ryan's stomach dropped. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't you?" Eric moved deeper into the cabin, his eyes scanning everything with predatory interest. "Come on, Ryan. Grandpa leaves you a worthless cabin and $100, but you're up here like it's Shangri-La, acting all secretive, bringing in experts." He gestured to Dr. Vance. "Who's your friend?" "Dr. Sarah Vance," she said calmly. "Historical consultant." "And you're trespassing." Eric laughed. "On my family's property?" "I don't think so. Actually," Dr. Vance said, "this property belongs to Ryan." The will was clear. Webb pulled out a tablet, scrolling through documents. The will specified the cabin, not any structures beneath it, not any contents stored therein that weren't specifically listed in the probate inventory. If Mr. Ryan Calloway has discovered assets that existed before his grandfather's death, those assets are technically part of the estate, which means they should be divided equally among all heirs. Ryan's jaw clenched. "That's not what?" Eric cut him off. "Not fair. Not what Grandpa wanted." He moved closer, and Gunnar's growl deepened. Eric stopped, eyeing the dog warily. "Look, I don't care what sentimental bullshit Grandpa fed you in some letter. If there's money here, if there's anything of value, we deserve our share." "You already got your share," Ryan said quietly. "The house. The portfolio. Remember? Pennies," Eric spat. "Compared to whatever you're hiding." Webb interjected smoothly. "Perhaps we could discuss this reasonably. If Mr. Calloway has found something of value, we can arrange an equitable distribution. No need for litigation, no need for unpleasantness." "Unless he refuses," Eric added. "Then we go to court. And trust me, Ryan, you don't want that fight. You're broke, you're unemployed, you're living out of your truck. You can't afford the lawyers we can afford." The words hit exactly where Eric intended them to. Ryan felt the familiar tightness in his chest, the walls closing in, the weight of his own failure pressing down like he was back in that compound in Helmand, pinned down, no way out. Gunnar pressed harder against his leg. The warmth, the solidity, pulled him back. "Get out," Ryan said. Eric's expression hardened. "Excuse me. I said get out. This is my property. You're not welcome here. We're family, Ryan." "No, we're not. Family doesn't laugh when someone gets left $100. Family doesn't show up with lawyers to take what little someone has left." Ryan's voice grew stronger. "You want to fight me in court? Fine. Do it. But right now, you need to leave." Eric took a step forward. Gunnar lunged, teeth bared, stopped only by Ryan's hand on his collar. Eric jumped back, face pale. "Control that animal." "He is controlled," Ryan said. "He just doesn't like threats." "Neither do I." Webb placed a calming hand on Eric's shoulder. "Mr. Calloway, we'll be in touch. Through proper legal channels." He pulled a business card from his pocket and set it on the table. "I'd advise you to consult an attorney. This situation is more complicated than you realize." They left, Eric shooting one last venomous look over his shoulder. The Mercedes pulled away, tires spinning briefly in the snow before finding traction. Ryan stood at the window, watching until the vehicle disappeared. His hands were shaking. The adrenaline that had carried him through the confrontation was draining away, leaving exhaustion in its wake. Dr. Vance touched his shoulder gently. "You okay?" "No." Ryan's voice cracked. "They're going to take everything. Not if we move fast." She pulled out her phone. "I know people. Lawyers who specialize in this exact kind of situation. Restitution experts, historians, federal agents who handle recovered war assets. If we bring them in now, before your brother can file anything, we can establish a proper chain of custody. Protect the gold and protect you." Ryan turned to face her. "And what happens to me in all this? Honestly, I don't know. Best case, you're recognized as doing the right thing. Worst case, you're investigated for possessing stolen property, even though you had no idea it existed." She paused. "But here's what I do know. If your brother gets control of this, he'll sell it to private collectors who don't care where it came from. The gold will disappear into vaults and safety deposit boxes, and the families who lost everything will never see a penny. Is that what you want?" Ryan thought about his grandfather's letter. Make sure it helps people who need help. He looked down at Gunnar. The dog watched him with those clear, unwavering eyes. The eyes that had seen Ryan at his worst and stayed anyway. The eyes that trusted him to make the right choice even when it cost everything. "Call your people," Ryan said. "All of them. Let's do this right." The next 72 hours moved with a speed that left Ryan dizzy. Dr. Vance's contacts descended on Trapper's Ridge like a carefully orchestrated military operation. Federal agents from the FBI's art crime team, historians from the Holocaust Museum, lawyers from Jewish restitution organizations, a Treasury Department official who'd spent 30 years tracking Nazi gold. They cataloged everything, photographed every bar, documented every crate, cross-referenced serial numbers with wartime records that had been digitized decades ago. They found matches, gold bars stolen from the Belgian National Bank, bars taken from Dutch reserves, bars that had once belonged to families whose names were found in meticulous German records, families who'd been forced to surrender their wealth before being murdered. Ryan watched it all from a distance, feeling like a ghost in his own story. Gunnar stayed close, sensing his distress, occasionally nudging his hand when the breathing got too shallow, when the memories tried to pull him under. On the fourth day, Eric's lawsuit arrived, just as Webb had promised. A formal petition to halt all actions related to the vault pending determination of proper ownership. A motion to freeze any assets pending court review. But Eric was too late. The gold was already in federal custody. The FBI had transported it to a secure facility in Denver. All that remained at Trapper's Ridge was an empty vault and a cabin that suddenly felt very small. Ryan sat at the wooden table where his grandfather had probably sat 1,000 times, reading the lawsuit papers while snow fell outside. Dr. Vance sat across from him, her own legal team on speakerphone. "They don't have a case," one of the lawyers said. "The gold was never part of the probate estate because your grandfather never legally owned it. He stole it, which means it was never his to leave to anyone. So what happens to it?" Ryan asked. "It gets returned. To governments, to museums, to restitution funds for Holocaust survivors and their descendants. There's a whole protocol for this. It'll take years, but eventually, every bar will go where it should have gone in 1945. And what happens to me?" A pause. "That's complicated. You didn't steal it. You reported it. You cooperated fully. But you did possess stolen property, even unknowingly. The FBI will likely conclude you acted in good faith, but..." The lawyer trailed off. "But I'm still broke," Ryan finished. "Still homeless. Still exactly where I was before I found it." "Yes," the lawyer said quietly. "I'm sorry." Dr. Vance ended the call. She looked at Ryan across the table. "I know this isn't what you wanted to hear. It's exactly what I expected to hear." Ryan stood, moving to the window. "I just thought. I don't know what I thought. That doing the right thing might matter somehow." "It does matter," Dr. Vance said firmly. "Ryan, that gold is going to change lives. Real lives. Families who thought they'd never see justice will get something back. Not everything. Nothing can give them back what they lost. But something. And that's because of you. Because of my grandfather. No, because of you. Your grandfather hid it. You brought it to light. There's a difference." Gunnar barked once, sharp and urgent. Both of them turned. The dog stood at the cabin door, ears forward, body tense. Ryan opened the door. A car was pulling into the clearing, but not Eric's Mercedes. This was a beat-up Subaru with Montana plates and a bumper sticker that read Veterans for Peace. A man stepped out, older, maybe mid-70s, wearing a military surplus jacket and a knit cap. He moved slowly, carefully, like someone who'd lived with pain long enough to know its rhythms. "Ryan Calloway?" he called out. "Who's asking?" The man approached, stopping a respectful distance away. "My name is David Morrison. My father was Thomas Morrison. He served with your grandfather in Germany." Ryan's chest tightened. "Morrison, one of the 4 men who'd buried the gold. Your father died in 1945. I know. My mother told me the stories. How he'd found something. How he'd planned to come home rich. How he never got the chance." David's eyes were wet. "I spent my whole life wondering if the stories were true. If my father really had found something, or if it was just talk, just dreams." "They were true," Ryan said quietly. David nodded slowly. "I heard the news. About the gold being recovered. About Samuel Calloway's grandson turning it over to the authorities. I had to come. Had to see the place where it all started. Had to." He stopped, voice breaking. "Had to thank you." Ryan stared at him. "Thank me? Your father died for that gold." "My father died in a war. The gold didn't kill him. The Nazis did." David stepped closer. "But that gold haunted our family for 70 years. My mother never believed my father was a thief. She always said he was just a scared kid trying to take care of her. And now the gold's being returned. Now it's helping people. Now my father's name isn't attached to something shameful." Tears ran down the old man's cheeks. "You gave my father his honor back. You gave all 4 of those boys their honor back. And I came to say thank you." Ryan didn't remember moving, but suddenly he was hugging this stranger, this son of a dead soldier who'd made the same desperate choice Ryan's grandfather had made. Both of them crying in the snow while Gunnar pressed against their legs and Dr. Vance watched from the doorway with tears in her own eyes. When they finally separated, David pulled an envelope from his jacket. "This is for you. It's not much. Some money my father saved before he shipped out. My mother kept it all these years. She'd want you to have it." Ryan tried to refuse, but David pressed it into his hands. "Please, let me give you something after what you've given me." After David left, Ryan opened the envelope. Inside was $3,000 in old bills and a note from David's mother, written decades ago, "For Tommy, when he comes home. For the life we'll build together." Ryan sat on the cabin steps, holding money that had waited 80 years for a soldier who never came home. Gunnar leaned against him, warm and solid and absolutely certain that whatever came next, they'd face it together. "We did the right thing," Ryan whispered. "Didn't we?" Gunnar licked his hand once. Slow and deliberate. The gesture that meant, "I trust you. I believe in you. We're okay." And maybe they were. Maybe doing the right thing didn't always come with rewards or recognition or happy endings. Maybe sometimes the reward was just knowing you'd chosen honor over profit, truth over convenience, light over the easier path of darkness. Ryan looked out at the mountains, snow-covered and ancient and indifferent to human stories. But somewhere in those mountains, his grandfather had hidden a secret. And somewhere in Ryan's chest, locked away just as securely, was the knowledge that he'd done something that mattered. It would have to be enough. 6 months passed like water through fingers, quick and cold and impossible to hold. Eric's lawsuit died in court, dismissed with prejudice when the judge ruled that stolen property couldn't be claimed through inheritance law. Vanessa never even showed up to the final hearing. Ryan suspected she'd distanced herself from the whole thing the moment the news went public, embarrassed by the association with Nazi gold and family shame. Ryan didn't stay at the cabin. Couldn't really. The FBI had sealed it during their investigation, and even after they released it back to him, the place felt haunted by too many ghosts. He sold it to the Forest Service for $8,000, enough to fix his truck and rent a small apartment in Missoula. The money from David Morrison's mother paid for the first month's rent and groceries. The rest he saved, holding it like a promise that good things could still exist in a world that often felt designed to crush them. He found work at a Veterans Resource Center, helping other former soldiers navigate the bureaucracy of VA claims and disability paperwork. The pay was terrible, barely enough to cover rent and dog food, but it felt right. Like using his own broken pieces to help other people glue theirs back together. Gunnar came to work with him every day. The other veterans loved the dog, gravitated toward him like he gave off some kind of warmth they couldn't find anywhere else. Maybe he did. Ryan had long since stopped trying to explain what Gunnar meant to him. The dog was just there, constant, loyal, the only thing in Ryan's life that had never wavered. Then one morning in July, a letter arrived at the resource center. Official letterhead, federal seal. Ryan's hands shook as he opened it. Dear Mr. Calloway, on behalf of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum and the World Jewish Restitution Organization, we are writing to formally acknowledge your role in the recovery and restitution of assets stolen during the Holocaust. The gold bars recovered from the Trappers Ridge site have been authenticated and traced to multiple sources, including the Belgian National Bank, the Dutch National Reserve, and private accounts seized from Jewish families in occupied territories. Through your cooperation, these assets are being returned to their rightful owners or their descendants. While we cannot offer compensation for your actions, we would like to extend an invitation to attend a ceremony in Washington, D.C., where you will be recognized for your commitment to justice and historical accountability. Ryan read the letter 3 times. Gunnar sat beside him, head tilted, watching with those knowing eyes. They want to give me an award, Ryan said aloud. The words felt strange in his mouth. For doing what anyone should have done. But that wasn't quite true, was it? Plenty of people would have kept the gold, sold it quietly, lived out their lives in comfort and secrecy. His own brother had been ready to fight him in court for a share of stolen wealth. Ryan had chosen differently, not because he was special, but because his grandfather had trusted him to be the kind of man who would. The ceremony was held in September, a quiet affair in one of the museum's conference rooms. Ryan wore the only suit he owned, bought at Goodwill for $30. Gunnar wore a new collar, leather instead of nylon, because Dr. Vance had insisted the dog deserved something nice. Dr. Vance was there, sitting in the front row beside David Morrison and his family. A handful of historians, a representative from the Treasury Department, and 3 elderly survivors who'd traveled from Israel to be present. The museum director spoke about the importance of historical memory, about the courage it took to choose honesty over profit, about Ryan's grandfather and the burden of guilt he'd carried for 60 years, and the grandson who'd chosen to lift that burden by doing the hardest thing. Then they called Ryan to the podium. He stood there, looking out at a room full of people who seemed to believe he was something he wasn't. A hero, a moral example, someone worth celebrating. He glanced down at Gunnar, sitting perfectly still at his feet. The dog looked back at him, and in that gaze Ryan found everything he needed. I'm not a hero, Ryan said, his voice rough and uncertain. I'm just someone who found something that didn't belong to me and gave it back. That's not heroism. That's just basic decency. He paused, gathering his thoughts. My grandfather lived with guilt for 60 years. He did something terrible because he was scared and desperate and human. And he spent the rest of his life trying to figure out how to make it right. He never could. Not while he was alive. Ryan's throat tightened. But he trusted me to do what he couldn't. To bring the truth into the light. To choose the hard right over the easy wrong. And I did that because of him. Because of what he taught me, even through his mistakes. He looked at the survivors in the front row, their faces carved by time and suffering and endurance. This gold belonged to your families. To people who were murdered for being Jewish, for being different, for being in the wrong place when the worst people in history decided to destroy the world. What my grandfather did was wrong. Keeping it hidden was wrong. But I hope that returning it helps somehow. Even a little. One of the survivors, a woman in her 90s with numbers tattooed on her forearm, stood slowly. She walked to the podium with a cane, her steps careful but determined. When she reached Ryan, she took his hand in both of hers. Young man, she said, her accent thick with the weight of Warsaw and Auschwitz and 7 decades of survival. You have done a mitzvah, a blessing. My family's gold will not bring back my parents or my brothers, but it will build a school in Jerusalem with their names on the wall. It will make sure they are remembered. Tears ran down her face. That is not nothing. That is everything. Ryan couldn't speak, could barely breathe. He squeezed her hands gently, and she squeezed back, and in that moment something passed between them. Understanding. Forgiveness. The acknowledgement that sometimes the best we can do is try to make the future better than the past. After the ceremony, people crowded around Ryan, shaking his hand, thanking him, telling him he'd done something important. He smiled and nodded and tried to be gracious, but all he wanted was to leave, to get back to Missoula, to return to the small life he'd built from the wreckage of everything he'd lost. Dr. Vance found him outside, where he'd escaped with Gunnar to get some air. "You okay?" she asked. "I don't know," Ryan admitted. "I keep waiting to feel different. Like this should have changed me somehow. But I just feel tired." "That's because you did the work. The real work. Not the glory part, the hard part." She smiled. "But there's something you should know. The museum, along with several of the restitution organizations, they've established a fund for educational programs, research, continued recovery efforts. And they want you to help administer it." Ryan stared at her. "What? It's not a fortune. It's a salary, benefits, enough to live on. They want someone who understands what's at stake. Someone who proved they can be trusted." She paused. "Someone like you. I'm not qualified. You're the most qualified person I know." Dr. Vance touched his shoulder. "This is your grandfather's legacy becoming something good. This is you turning guilt into purpose. Say yes, Ryan." He looked down at Gunnar. The dog wagged his tail once, slow and deliberate. "Yeah," Ryan said quietly. "Okay. Yes." 1 year later, Ryan stood on the porch of a small house he'd bought on the outskirts of Missoula. Not fancy, just 2 bedrooms, a yard for Gunnar, and a garage he'd converted into an office. The house where he worked with historians and lawyers and survivors to track down stolen assets and return them to the families they'd been taken from. The work was slow, painstaking, often heartbreaking. But it mattered. Every bar of gold returned, every painting recovered, every piece of stolen property brought back to light was a small victory against the darkness that had tried to swallow everything. Gunnar was getting older now, gray around the muzzle, moving a little slower in the mornings. But he still came to work every day, still supervised meetings with the grave importance of a general reviewing his troops. Ryan's phone buzzed. A text from Dr. Vance. "Good news. Just authenticated another cache. Portugal. Your grandfather's old unit might be connected. Want to help research?" Ryan smiled and typed back, "Always." He looked out at the mountains, snow-capped even in summer, eternal and indifferent and beautiful. His grandfather had hidden a secret in those mountains. But Ryan had brought it home, transformed it, turned theft into justice and guilt into redemption. It wasn't the ending he'd expected. It wasn't wealth or recognition or the kind of success his siblings valued. But it was purpose. Real, lasting purpose. The kind that meant waking up each morning and knowing the work mattered. Gunnar pressed against his leg, warm and solid and absolutely certain that they were exactly where they belonged. "Come on, boy," Ryan said, scratching behind the dog's ears. "We've got work to do." And together, they walked inside. A soldier and his dog, no longer broken, no longer homeless, no longer defined by what they'd lost. They were healers now, guardians of memory, proof that even in the darkest stories, light could still find a way through. The mountains stood silent behind them, keeping their secrets. But this one had been told. And in the telling, something had been made right. Not everything, not all the way, but enough. Enough to matter. Enough to build on. Enough to believe that tomorrow might be better than yesterday. And sometimes, that was all the fortune anyone needed. 3 years had passed since the ceremony in Washington. Ryan sat in his home office, surrounded by file boxes labeled with dates and locations spanning 70 years of history. Gunnar dozed in his usual spot beneath the desk, his breathing slow and steady, the rhythm Ryan used to measure time when the work got too heavy. The phone rang. An unfamiliar number with a New York area code. "Ryan Calloway," he answered. "Mr. Calloway, my name is Rebecca Stein. I'm calling from the claims conference in New York. We've been working on a case, and your name came up as someone who might be able to help." Ryan straightened in his chair. The claims conference handled restitution for Holocaust survivors worldwide. If they were calling him directly, it was something complicated. "What do you need?" "We've located a survivor, 94 years old, living in a care facility in Brooklyn. Her name is Ruth Bergman. She was 8 years old when her family was taken from their home in Vienna. Before they were deported, her father hid something: family jewelry, documents, and a substantial amount of gold coins. He told young Ruth where he'd hidden it, made her memorize the location in case she survived, and they didn't." Ryan's chest tightened. She was the only one who survived. Yes, she spent 3 years in camps, then orphanages, then finally emigrated to the United States in 1952. She's been looking for that hiding place her entire life. And we think we've found it. Where? That's the problem. The building where her family lived was destroyed in the war, rebuilt in the 1950s. The new construction sits on top of the original basement where her father hid everything. Austrian authorities won't authorize excavation without proof the assets exist. They think it's just an old woman's trauma memory, not reality. Ryan stood, pacing to the window. Gunnar lifted his head, watching. What makes you think it's real? Because Ruth Bergman's story matches your grandfather's journal entries almost exactly. In 1945, your grandfather's unit swept through Vienna. According to his notes, they found a sealed basement in the Jewish quarter. The official report says they found nothing. But your grandfather wrote something else in his personal journal. Ryan's pulse quickened. What did he write? He wrote, "Found a child's hiding place today. Toys, drawings, a doll with one eye. And beneath the floorboards, a metal box sealed with wax. Couldn't open it. Command said leave it, building's unstable. But I marked the location. Someday, maybe that child will come home. Maybe they'll want what their father left them." Ryan's vision blurred. He sat down hard, gripping the phone. He knew. My grandfather knew someone might come back for it. We think so. And we think the location he marked corresponds to the building that now stands at Schottengasse 14 in Vienna. But we can't prove it without excavation, and we can't get authorization without someone who can verify your grandfather's account. Someone the Austrian government will take seriously. You want me to go to Vienna? We want you to help us bring Ruth Bergman home. One last time. To show her that what her father did mattered. That his hiding place kept their legacy safe for 79 years. Ryan looked down at Gunnar. The dog stood now, tail wagging slowly, sensing something shifting in the air. When? Ryan asked. As soon as possible. Ruth's health is declining. If we're going to do this, it needs to be now. Ryan thought about his grandfather, about a young soldier who'd stood in a destroyed building and chosen to leave something hidden instead of taking it. Who'd marked a location on a map and carried that knowledge for 60 years, hoping someone would need it. I'll come, Ryan said. We'll come. We. Ryan smiled, looking at Gunnar. Me and my dog. He's good at finding things people thought were lost forever. 2 weeks later, Ryan and Gunnar stood in Vienna's summer heat, jet-lagged and disoriented but determined. Dr. Vance had insisted on coming too, along with Rebecca Stein and a small team of archaeologists and historians. They'd brought Ruth Bergman, frail and wheelchair-bound, but with eyes that still burned with the memory of a child who'd survived the unsurvivable. Schottengasse 14 was a modern apartment building, all glass and steel and efficiency. Nothing remained of the 1930s structure that had once stood here. But beneath it, beneath meters of concrete and 70 years of construction, Ruth Bergman's past waited. The Austrian government had finally agreed to limited excavation, more out of curiosity than belief. They'd carved out a section of the building's basement, exposing the original foundation. And there, exactly where Ryan's grandfather's map indicated, was a section of old brick wall that predated everything around it. Ruth sat in her wheelchair at the edge of the excavation site, wrapped in a shawl despite the heat, staring at the wall with an expression Ryan couldn't read. Grief, hope, fear, all of it mixed together. That's it, she whispered in accented English. That's the wall. I remember. Papa made me stand right there while he showed me. He said, Ruth, you count 3 bricks from the corner, then 2 bricks up. That's where our family lives now. In the wall, waiting for us to come home. The lead archaeologist, a careful woman named Dr. Hoffman, approached the wall with tools that looked more surgical than construction-related. She counted bricks exactly as Ruth had described. 3 from the corner, 2 up. Then she carefully, reverently, began to remove the mortar. Ryan held his breath. Gunnar pressed against his leg, sensing the tension in the room. The brick came free. Behind it, darkness. Dr. Hoffman shined a light into the gap. There's something here, she said quietly. She reached in carefully and pulled out a metal box, roughly the size of a shoebox, sealed with wax that had somehow survived nearly 8 decades. The box was rusted but intact, and stamped on the lid in faded Hebrew letters was a name, Bergman. Ruth Bergman made a sound Ryan had never heard before. Not a cry, not a scream, something deeper. The sound of a child who'd waited 79 years to come home finally arriving. Dr. Hoffman brought the box to Ruth's wheelchair. She set it gently in the old woman's lap. Ruth's hands, twisted with arthritis and age, trembled as she touched the lid. Papa, she whispered. You kept your promise. You kept us safe. She tried to open it, but her hands wouldn't cooperate. Ryan knelt beside her. May I help? She nodded, tears streaming down her face. Together, they broke the wax seal. Together, they lifted the lid. Inside was everything her father had promised. Gold coins wrapped in cloth. Photographs of a family that no longer existed. Documents showing property ownership, business licenses, a life that had been stolen. And at the bottom, wrapped in a handkerchief, a small wooden doll with one eye missing. Ruth lifted the doll with shaking hands. She pressed it to her chest and wept, 86 years of grief finally finding its way out. Mama made this for me, she whispered. Before everything. Ryan stepped back, giving her space, giving her time. Gunnar moved forward instead, resting his chin gently on Ruth's knee. The old woman looked down at the dog, smiled through her tears, and touched his head with one trembling hand. Good dog, she whispered. Such a good dog. They stayed in Vienna for 3 more days while lawyers and historians cataloged everything in the box. The gold coins alone were worth nearly $200,000. The property documents, if they could be validated, might be worth millions. But Ruth didn't care about any of that. Keep it, she told the claims conference representatives. Use it for the museum. For education. For making sure people remember. She held up the doll. This is what I came for. This is what matters. On their last night in Vienna, Ryan sat with Ruth in the garden of her hotel, Gunnar dozing at their feet. The summer evening was warm, peaceful, nothing like the winter that had destroyed her childhood. Your grandfather, Ruth said quietly. He could have taken what my father hid. No one would have known. No one would have stopped him. He almost did, Ryan said honestly. He took gold from somewhere else. Lived with the guilt his whole life. But not from us. Not from my family. She smiled. He left us our dignity. He left us our chance to come home. That matters more than gold. Why? Ryan asked. Why does it matter so much? Ruth was quiet for a long time. Then she said, when the Nazis took everything from us, they didn't just take our homes and our money. They took our story. They tried to erase us from history, to make it like we never existed. But this, she held up the doll, this proves we were real. My father was real. My mother was real. Our love was real. And no one can take that away anymore. She looked at Ryan with eyes that had seen the worst of humanity and somehow still found reasons to hope. Your grandfather gave us back our story, and you brought it home. That is a mitzvah of the highest order. Ryan felt something break open in his chest. Not pain, release. Like he'd been carrying a weight he didn't know he held, and Ruth Bergman had just lifted it away. Thank you, he whispered. No, she said firmly. Thank you. Gunnar stirred, lifting his head to look at both of them. Then he sighed contentedly and went back to sleep, secure in the knowledge that the humans had finally figured out what he'd known all along. That some treasures weren't measured in gold, but in stories brought home, in promises kept, in dignity restored. When Ryan and Gunnar flew back to Montana, the world looked different somehow. Brighter, like he'd been seeing through smudged glass, and someone had finally wiped it clean. The work continued. More cases, more families, more pieces of stolen history brought back to light. But now Ryan understood what he was really doing. He wasn't just returning assets. He was returning stories. Giving people back the proof that they'd existed, that they'd mattered, that they were worthy of being remembered. His grandfather had started with theft and guilt. Ryan had transformed it into something else entirely. Into restoration. Into healing. Into the kind of justice that couldn't be measured in dollars, but only in the tears of old women holding dolls they thought they'd lost forever. And every night, when he came home to his small house with Gunnar at his side, Ryan would sit on the porch and look at the mountains. The same mountains where his grandfather had hidden his shame. The same mountains where Ryan had found his purpose. The ridge was still there, quiet and patient. But its secret had been told. And in the telling, something broken had been made whole. Not everything. Not completely. But enough. Always, miraculously, enough. Ryan pulled into the driveway of his house, just as autumn was painting the bitter roots in shades of gold and crimson. Gunnar rode beside him, gray-muzzled now, moving slower but still alert, still watching the world with eyes that missed nothing. The trip to Vienna had tired them both, but it had also filled something that had been empty for too long. Inside, the answering machine blinked with 17 messages. Ryan ignored them, too exhausted to care. He fed Gunnar, made himself a sandwich he barely tasted, and collapsed on the couch. The dog climbed up beside him, something he wasn't supposed to do, but Ryan had stopped enforcing years ago, and they both fell asleep to the sound of wind moving through pine trees. When Ryan woke, it was dark outside. Gunnar was standing at the window, ears forward, a low growl rumbling in his chest. "What is it, boy?" Then he heard it. A car engine. Headlights swept across the front of the house. Ryan stood, suddenly alert, that old combat instinct firing. Who would be coming here at night, unannounced? The car stopped. A door opened and closed. Footsteps on the gravel path. Then a knock, firm but not aggressive. Ryan checked the peephole. A woman stood on his porch, mid-30s, wearing jeans and a Montana State jacket, dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked tired, uncertain, like she'd driven a long way and wasn't sure she'd come to the right place. He opened the door, keeping Gunnar back with one hand. "Can I help you?" She looked up, and her eyes widened slightly. "Ryan Calloway?" "Yes. My name is Jessica Warren. I'm a journalist with the Washington Post. I've been following your work for the past 2 years. The gold restitution cases, Vienna, all of it." She paused. "I was hoping you might have time to talk." Ryan's jaw tightened. "I don't do interviews." "I know. I've asked 4 times. You never return my calls." She smiled slightly. "So I drove here instead. That's not going to change my answer. Please, just hear me out." She pulled a folder from her bag. "There's another case. One I don't think you know about. And I think you're the only person who can help." Ryan should have closed the door, should have sent her away. But something in her voice, the earnestness, the exhaustion, reminded him of himself 3 years ago. Desperate, looking for answers, hoping someone would listen. 5 minutes, he said. She stepped inside, nodding her thanks. Gunnar sniffed her carefully, then relaxed. Good enough for Ryan. Jessica sat at the kitchen table, spreading photographs and documents across the surface. In 1944, a transport train left Hungary carrying over 400 Jews to Auschwitz. But the train never arrived. It disappeared somewhere in the Austrian Alps. For 80 years, historians assumed everyone on board was killed, bodies destroyed, no trace remaining. She pulled out a map marked with red circles. But 6 months ago, a construction crew in the Alps found something. A sealed railway tunnel, collapsed entrance, hidden under 70 years of rock slides and forest growth. And inside that tunnel, they found the train. Ryan leaned forward despite himself. The people. Jessica's expression darkened. The bodies are still being recovered. But they also found something else. The Nazis had loaded the train with more than people. They'd loaded it with assets they were trying to move east, away from Allied advances. Gold, artwork, jewelry, and documents. Thousands of documents showing who owned what before it was stolen. "Let me guess," Ryan said. "The Austrian government wants to keep it." "Not exactly. They're willing to return everything, eventually, through proper channels. But there's a complication." She pulled out a photograph of a leather satchel, aged and cracked but intact. They found this on the train. Inside were personal letters, written by prisoners before they boarded. Final messages to family members they hoped would survive. And one of those letters is addressed to a soldier named Samuel Calloway. Ryan's world stopped. "What?" Jessica pushed the photograph across the table. "A Jewish woman named Hannah Rosen wrote to your grandfather. It's dated April 1944. She says he saved her brother's life in Vienna, that she wanted to thank him, that she was leaving something for him in case he came looking for her family after the war." Ryan's hands shook as he picked up the photograph. He could see the handwriting through the sealed plastic evidence bag. Careful, elegant, written by someone who knew she was about to die. "The Austrian authorities want to return the letter to your family," Jessica said. "But they need someone to authenticate it. Someone who has access to your grandfather's wartime documents and can verify he was in Vienna in 1944. "He was," Ryan said quietly. "I have his service record." "Then you're the only person who can bring Hannah Rosen's last message home." Jessica leaned forward. "Ryan, there are 400 families who lost people on that train. Most of them have no idea their relatives left final letters. This could be the only closure they ever get. But the Austrians won't release anything until someone verifies the first letter. Until someone proves these are real and not forgeries." Ryan looked down at Gunnar. The dog watched him with those clear eyes, waiting for Ryan to make the decision they both already knew he'd make. "When do they need me in Austria?" Jessica smiled, relief flooding her face. As soon as possible. I just got back from Vienna. I know. I'm sorry. But this can't wait. These families have waited 80 years. Some of them won't survive another 80 days. Ryan stood, moving to the window. The mountains were dark silhouettes against a darker sky. His grandfather had walked through those same mountains 70 years ago, carrying secrets and guilt and apparently, the memory of a woman named Hannah Rosen who'd wanted to thank him. Why? Ryan asked, not turning around. Why did my grandfather never mention her? Never mention saving anyone. Maybe he didn't think it mattered, Jessica said quietly. Maybe he thought one good deed didn't balance out the gold he stole. Maybe guilt made him forget the times he did the right thing. Ryan touched the window glass, cold against his palm. Or maybe he carried so much shame, he couldn't let himself remember being good. Jessica gathered her documents. Will you come? Ryan looked at Gunnar. The dog stood, tail wagging slowly, ready for whatever came next. Yeah, Ryan said. We'll come. 2 weeks later, Ryan stood in a secure facility outside Innsbruck, Austria, looking at a railway car that had been entombed in darkness for 80 years. The metal was rusted, windows shattered, but the structure had held. Inside, archaeologists and forensic specialists worked with the careful reverence of people handling sacred remains. Hannah Rosen's letter was brought to him in an evidence bag, sealed and preserved. A translator stood nearby, but Ryan had learned enough German over the years to read it himself. Dear Samuel, I do not know if you will ever read this. I do not know if I will live to see tomorrow. But I wanted to write, to thank you, to make sure someone remembers what you did. In Vienna, when my brother David was caught trying to flee, you were the soldier who found him. You could have turned him over to the Gestapo. Instead, you hid him. You gave him papers. You risked your life to save his. He made it to Switzerland. He is alive because of you. And I am on this train because I was not so lucky. I hide this letter in a place I hope you will find. I hide it with something my father gave me before he died. A gift for the man who saved his son. If you find this, please know, you are a good man, Samuel Calloway. You saved one life. In Jewish faith, we say whoever saves one life, saves the world entire. You saved the world. Do not forget that. With gratitude, Hannah Rosen. Ryan's vision blurred. He read it 3 times, his grandfather's name appearing again and again in elegant script, written by a woman who'd died thanking a soldier who'd never forgiven himself. There's more, the lead archaeologist said quietly. She handed him a small metal tin, rusted but sealed. This was with the letter. Ryan opened it carefully. Inside, wrapped in cloth that disintegrated at his touch, was a gold pocket watch. Engraved on the back, to Samuel, who chose life. Jacob Rosen, 1938. Hannah's father, the man whose son had been saved. This watch was his thank you, hidden with his daughter's final words. Waiting for a soldier who never came looking because he'd been too consumed by what he'd taken to remember what he'd given. Ryan closed his eyes, holding the watch, feeling the weight of gratitude that had traveled 80 years to reach him. Did you find David? He asked. Hannah's brother? Jessica, who'd been standing nearby documenting everything, nodded. David Rosen. He survived the war, emigrated to Israel in 1947, had 3 children, 12 grandchildren, 38 great-grandchildren. He died in 2019 at age 97. But his daughter is still alive. She lives in Tel Aviv. We've contacted her. Does she know about the letter? Not yet. We wanted you to verify it first. Ryan looked down at the watch, then at Hannah's words. You saved the world. It's real, he said quietly. My grandfather was in Vienna. He saved people. And he never told anyone because he didn't think it was enough to balance what he'd done wrong. The archaeologist touched his shoulder gently. But it was enough. For Hannah. For David. For all the people descended from one life your grandfather chose to save. Ryan spent 3 days in Austria, helping authenticate all 400 letters found on the train. Each one was a final message, a goodbye, a desperate hope that someone would remember. By the end, he couldn't read anymore without breaking down. The weight of all that loss, all that hope, all those voices crying out from 80 years ago, it was crushing. But it was also important. Necessary. Sacred work. On the final day, David Rosen's daughter arrived from Tel Aviv. Her name was Miriam, and she carried herself with the quiet strength of someone descended from survivors. Ryan gave her Hannah's letter and Jacob's watch personally. She read the letter in silence, tears streaming down her face. When she finished, she looked up at Ryan. "Your grandfather saved my father. Which means he saved me, my children, my grandchildren. Our entire family exists because of one choice he made." She pressed the letter to her chest. "Thank you for bringing her words home. Thank you for making sure we know." Ryan couldn't speak, could only nod as this woman, this living legacy of his grandfather's one good deed, embraced him like family. That night, sitting in his hotel room with Gunnar curled at his feet, Ryan called the number Mitchell Greer had left him years ago. The old lawyer answered on the third ring. "Mitchell, it's Ryan Calloway." "Ryan, good to hear your voice. How are you?" "I'm in Austria. I found something. Something about my grandfather I need to understand." He told Mitchell everything. The letters, the saved brother, the watch, Hannah's gratitude. When he finished, Mitchell was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Your grandfather came to see me about 6 months before he died. He told me he was leaving you the cabin, leaving you the responsibility of the gold. I asked him why you specifically. Why not split everything equally?" "What did he say?" "He said you were the only one who understood guilt. The only one who'd lived with the weight of impossible choices. He said soldiers know something civilians don't, that you can do terrible things and good things in the same life, and neither one erases the other. You just have to live with both and hope the good outweighs the bad in the end." Ryan's throat tightened. "He thought I'd understand because I'd been to war. He thought you'd understand because you'd survived war and come home still trying to be a good man. Like he did. Like he hoped he was." Ryan looked down at Gunnar, at this dog who'd seen him at his absolute worst and stayed anyway. Who'd never judged, never wavered, never stopped believing Ryan was worth saving. "Was he?" Ryan asked. "Was my grandfather a good man?" Mitchell's answer came without hesitation. "He was a human man who made human mistakes and spent his whole life trying to make them right. That's the best any of us can hope for." When Ryan hung up, he sat in the dark for a long time, holding Jacob Rosen's watch, thinking about his grandfather standing in Vienna choosing to save a life instead of end one. Choosing good in a world that had gone mad with evil. The gold had been stolen. That was true. But the life saved was real too. And maybe, just maybe, one balanced the other enough that Samuel Calloway could finally rest. Ryan returned to Montana with Gunnar, with Hannah's gratitude, and with a new understanding of the man who'd given him an impossible inheritance. He added Jacob's watch to the small collection of artifacts he kept in his office. Reminders, anchors, proof that even in darkness, people still chose light. The work continued. Always, the work continued. More families reunited with their stories. More stolen treasures returned. More final messages delivered across decades and distance. And every time Ryan felt the weight of it becoming too much, he'd look at Gunnar, or touch Jacob's watch, or remember Hannah Rosen's words. "You saved the world." Maybe his grandfather had. Maybe Ryan was continuing that work. Maybe that was enough. Maybe it would always be enough. 5 years after finding the gold, Ryan Calloway stood in the Montana State Capitol building, surrounded by historians, survivors, and government officials. The governor had asked him to speak at the dedication of a new memorial, the Samuel Calloway Center for Holocaust Education and Restitution. It had been funded entirely by the gold his grandfather had stolen and Ryan had returned. The state had worked with federal authorities and restitution organizations to allocate a portion specifically for education, for making sure future generations understood what had been lost and what had been found. Ryan hadn't wanted his grandfather's name on anything, didn't think a thief deserved memorials. But the survivors had insisted. Hannah Rosen's family most of all. "Your grandfather took and he gave," Miriam had said when they discussed it months earlier. "Let his name represent both. Let it represent the truth, that people are complicated, that redemption is possible, that one good choice can echo across generations." So here he stood, Gunnar at his side wearing a formal service vest, about to speak to a room full of people who'd come to witness history being honored. He looked out at the crowd and saw faces he recognized. Dr. Vance, who'd believed in him when he had nothing. Jessica Warren, the journalist who'd become a friend. David Morrison's son, representing the families of the men who'd buried the gold. Ruth Bergman's granddaughter, carrying the one-eyed doll her great-grandmother had clutched until she died. And in the front row, wearing an expression Ryan couldn't quite read, sat Vanessa and Eric. His siblings had reached out 6 months ago. Tentatively. Awkwardly. Vanessa's email had been brief. I saw the news about the memorial. I'm proud of what you've done. I'm ashamed of how I acted. If you're willing, I'd like to talk. Eric's had been simpler. You were right. About everything. I'm sorry. Ryan had invited them to the dedication. He wasn't ready to forgive completely, wasn't sure he ever would be, but he was ready to acknowledge that people could change, that shame could lead to growth, that even his siblings deserved a chance to be better than they'd been. The governor finished her introduction. Ryan stepped to the podium, hands shaking slightly. Gunnar pressed against his leg, steadying him like always. My grandfather, Samuel Calloway, was not a perfect man, Ryan began. He made choices that haunted him his entire life. He took things that didn't belong to him. He lived with guilt that shaped every day of his last 60 years. He paused, gathering strength. But he also saved lives. He made choices that gave people futures they thought they'd lost. He carried the burden of his mistakes and tried, in his own flawed way, to make them right. Ryan looked down at Gunnar, then out at the crowd. I think that's all any of us can do. Acknowledge our mistakes, carry our guilt, and work every day to leave the world better than we found it. My grandfather left me an impossible inheritance. Not just gold, but responsibility. The responsibility to choose what kind of man I wanted to be. He touched the podium, grounding himself. This center isn't about glorifying theft or pretending wrong can be made right with good intentions. It's about remembering. It's about making sure the people who lost everything aren't forgotten. It's about returning dignity, stories, and truth to families who had them stolen. His voice grew stronger. My grandfather couldn't do that while he was alive, but he gave me the chance to do it for him. And with the help of Dr. Vance, the restitution organizations, survivors like Ruth Bergman and Hannah Rosen's family, and this dog who saved my life more times than I can count, we've returned over $500 million in stolen assets to their rightful owners. The crowd erupted in applause. Ryan waited for it to fade. But the money isn't what matters. What matters is the granddaughter who got to hold her grandmother's doll, the son who got to read his mother's final letter, the families who got proof that their loved ones existed, mattered, were worth remembering. Tears slid down his face, and he didn't wipe them away. My grandfather was a complicated man who made terrible choices and good choices in the same life. This center represents both. It represents the truth that we're all capable of wrong, and we're all capable of making it right. It represents the hope that even our worst mistakes can become our greatest legacies if we're brave enough to face them. He stepped back from the podium. The room rose in a standing ovation. Gunnar wagged his tail, accepting the applause like the hero he'd always been. Afterward, during the reception, Vanessa approached Ryan carefully. That was beautiful, she said quietly. I'm sorry I never understood. Sorry I was so focused on money that I missed what actually mattered. Eric stood beside her, less polished than Ryan remembered, humbler somehow. You did something incredible, he said. With nothing. You turned Grandpa's shame into something that helps people. I spent years building real estate portfolios, and I never helped anyone the way you have. Ryan looked at them, at these siblings who'd mocked him, who tried to take the one thing their grandfather had entrusted to him. He could hold on to anger, could refuse forgiveness, could let the past define them forever, or he could choose something else. Thank you for coming, Ryan said simply. It means something that you're here. It wasn't forgiveness, not completely, but it was a beginning, and sometimes beginnings were enough. That night, Ryan drove home to his small house with Gunnar sleeping in the passenger seat. The mountains were dark against a star-filled sky, and the world felt quieter than it had in years. Inside, he sat on the porch with a cup of coffee. Gunnar settled at his feet and pulled out his phone. He scrolled through photos from the past 5 years. Ruth Bergman holding her doll, Hannah Rosen's letter, Miriam embracing him in Austria, the memorial dedication, faces of people whose stories had come home. His grandfather had started with theft. Ryan had transformed it into something else entirely. Not redemption, exactly. You couldn't redeem theft. But purpose, meaning, a way to turn wrong into a kind of right that mattered to the people who'd lost everything. Gunnar stirred, lifting his gray muzzle to look at Ryan. The dog was old now, moving slowly, sleeping more. But his eyes were still clear, still certain, still absolutely convinced that Ryan was worth following anywhere. We did good, didn't we, boy? Ryan whispered. Gunnar's tail thumped once against the porch boards. Ryan looked out at the mountains, at the ridge where his grandfather had hidden a secret that changed everything. The cabin was gone now, sold and demolished. But its legacy remained. In the center that bore his grandfather's name. In the families who got their stories back. In the grandson who'd chosen light over darkness, truth over convenience, purpose over profit. The stars wheeled overhead, ancient and indifferent and beautiful. Somewhere in those mountains, his grandfather's spirit rested easier. Or maybe that was just what Ryan needed to believe. Either way, the work was done. The inheritance had been claimed, not in gold, but in something far more valuable. The knowledge that even the worst mistakes could lead to moments of grace. That guilt could transform into purpose. That one man's shame could become another man's calling. Ryan finished his coffee and stood. Gunnar rose beside him, stiff but steady, ready for whatever came next. "Come on, boy," Ryan said softly. "Let's go home." And together, they walked inside. A soldier and his dog. A thief's grandson and the legacy he'd transformed. Proof that sometimes the most valuable inheritance wasn't measured in gold at all, but in the choices made when the whole world was watching and in the quiet moments when no one was watching at all. The mountains stood silent behind them, keeping their remaining secrets. But this story of theft and guilt and redemption, had been told completely. And in the telling, something broken had been made whole. Not perfect, never perfect, but whole enough, true enough, good enough to matter. And that, in the end, was the only fortune worth having.